Elephant poaching has reached critical levels. A recent agreement between the American and Chinese governments that aims to enact a nearly complete ban on the import and export of ivory has been welcomed as a huge step in the right direction. But how did the demand for ivory get so out of control in the first place? It is almost inconceivable to imagine Africa without elephants. They're one of the most iconic animals on our planet. Just a few decades ago, the continent was teeming with enormous herds walking across the African plains. But today, elephants are walking the road to extinction, thanks to the relentless poaching for their ivory. To figure out how we got here, we have to turn back the clock to the 1970s and 80s, when the demand for ivory first skyrocketed. During this time, no one was monitoring trade, and ivory was being sold legally, even though it was being taken illegally. It's estimated that 100,000 elephants a year were being killed, enough to halve the entire population in just 10 years. For the first time in history, elephants were in crisis. Something had to be done urgently. And in 1989, CITES, the body that governs trade in endangered species, officially banned any trade in ivory. Dr. Paula Kahumbu is the CEO of NGO Wildlife Direct and heads up the Hands Off Our Elephants campaign. She explains the impact of the ban.
I think it was the best possible ever decision. It was a decision that created enormous public awareness about this magnificent species and what was happening on the ground. And it also led people who were buying ivory without really understanding the role they were playing in killing these elephants to rethink their buying decisions. So people in Europe, people in the US simply said no to ivory.
The result was that the bottom dropped out of the ivory market and prices plummeted. The global ban stood fast for 10 years, and it seemed the crisis was over. Elephant numbers began to recover. But this growth was enough to spur certain southern African countries on to lobby CITES to reopen the ivory trade in the form of a once-off sale of their ivory stockpiles, accumulated through natural mortalities and game management.
In 1997, I think the world made a horrendous mistake. The elephant populations had been recovering for the previous 20 years since the ban was put in place. And we really forgot that that is just a fraction of the lifetime of an elephant. These animals are long-lived. You cannot do short-term interventions thinking that you're going to save a long-lived animal. So yes, elephant populations were increasing. But to then put everything at risk again by selling that ivory and persuading the world that somehow we can nip it in the bud if we're wrong, that's just being stupid.
Despite grave concerns, CITES granted permission for the once-off sale, which happened in 1999. They granted another in 2008. The theory behind the decision was that the sale would flood the market with legal ivory and go a long way to preventing the illegal trade as well. It was the beginning of the current poaching crisis.
Suddenly, we're allowing a one-off sale, which actually resulted in yet another one-off sale. I mean, it kind of totally flying in the face of what we'd agreed. The message to the world was ivory trade will reopen sometime in the future. So start stockpiling. The value of ivory is rising. And if you're a country that has ivory, hold on to it, don't destroy it. If you're a country that wants to trade in ivory, bide your time, it's coming. And that's exactly what happened. And the poaching of elephants just began to really escalate, especially after the 2008 sale to China. It's just gone completely out of control.
As ivory from the legal sales became available, there were record numbers of illegal ivory seizures all over the world. Evidence that the legal trade was, and still is, driving the illegal trade and poaching. The legal trade is also full of loopholes, as a recent investigation into Hong Kong's so-called legal ivory industry showed. The report, published by conservation organisations WildAid and the African Wildlife Foundation, found that ivory traders are using the legal trade as a cover for smuggling and are simply replacing their legal stock with the legal ivory. And there is virtually no way to tell the difference.
详细的那个资料这样子嘛，只是说原料多少，制品你多少，这样子按重量，你哪里呢？那是偷龙转来转去嘛，对不对？对不对？那个我这个东西当时登记了，卖出去了，又用了非法的原料做了，要放带地上去，还带这呢，也不是这个随便的东西都可以带去嘛，所以这根本不懂得管。
There's also evidence that the illegal wildlife trade is becoming a huge threat to world security, and global leaders have started to acknowledge this.
And we have good reason to believe that rebel militias are players in a worldwide ivory market worth millions and millions of dollars a year.
And it is time to talk about the growing human demand for illegal wildlife products that drives the trade and makes it profitable.
But on the ground back in Africa, elephant populations have reached the tipping point where more are being killed than are being born. It's the beginning of the end, unless something is done. The agreement between the US government and China is a huge step in the right direction. Although there are many skeptics, it's the most significant step yet towards shutting down the illegal ivory trade. The Hong Kong government has been strongly urged to plug the loopholes in its so-called legal trade as well. But at the end of the day, until demand for ivory ceases to exist and the world realizes the value of elephants beyond their tusks, poaching will continue.
In many parts of Africa, we are faced with so many other challenges and priorities. You know, there's terrorism, there's poverty, there's health issues. A lot of people say, well, why should we care about elephants? You know, they're not bringing in that much revenue. What are they doing? What's the purpose and what good are they anyways? I think that deep down, we all know that elephants and rhinos and these magnificent species of Africa are far more valuable than any amount of money that will ever be generated from them, from their horns or their tusks or tourism. These animals are the identity of Africans. We don't need to justify why we should keep them. We don't justify why Mount Kilimanjaro shouldn't be mowed down and turned into, construction material. We don't justify why our cathedrals should be kept or the pyramids should be protected. These are monuments. They're not just African monuments. These are global monuments. Our wildlife needs to be respected as global monuments.